Good morning. It's Wednesday, and I'm getting started a little bit late. It's 10 after 7 already, so I'm going to have to hurry because I got a meeting at 8. I hope SATs went well for you guys yesterday and that you did your best and you are ready to start your e-learning day with APUSH, the most awesome. So we're on page 8, and we're not really going to, we're going to get through all of these Great Depression notes today, New Deal especially, with all these different agencies that FDR creates to get us through this crisis of magnitude unseen in the history of the world and hopefully ever in the history of the world. The top of page 8 is a really important one, especially for us here in rural Indiana and all of you that get your energy from wind energy or REMC. Is the Rural Electrification Administration. That starts in May 1935, provided loans and WPA labor to electrify cooperatives to build lines into rural areas not served by private companies. So that becomes the way most of the rest of the world, if you didn't live in Chicago or LA or Boston or Philadelphia, get electricity. And many of you probably have relatives that grew up in a time period where they did not have electricity, especially if they were out on a farm. And so this rural electrification REA is significantly important in two things. One, jobs, right? It gives jobs to lots of people to build these power plants, to get lines out to houses, and then to run them. So it is really important. The next one is the NRA, which is always a hard one for students because in our time frame, NRA means something else. This is the National Recovery, NIRA, but it's NRA, National Recovery. Most complex and most far-reaching of the New Deal programs designed to prevent extreme competition, labor management, and overproduction. So FDR and his administration knew that they needed some kind of way to manage and control the manufacturing sector of the United States. And how to do that in a capitalist society is really difficult, right? Because in a capitalist society, we leave manufacturers up to their own designs to make a profit. And when we interfere with that profit, or even their ability to make a profit or to tell them how to run their company, it gets a little sketchy and a little dicey when again, you are a capitalist nation. So this is going to be very controversial. It's going to be something that will cause some issues further down the line. Board would be composed of labor leaders, industrial leaders, to work out codes of fair competition. So in that aspect, it's good, again, trying to get rid of some of those long-lasting trusts and monopolies that had held on. Some really good things come out of that. Maximum hours worked to spread out unemployment so that you're not working somebody 10 hours a day when you could be working 2 people, 8 hours a day kind of thing to get people back to work. A minimum wage will be established, so that is significant, especially for most teenagers who are working for minimum wage. Again, this is the controversial one, setting prices. Anytime you set prices, that tends to move toward a kind of a communist feel to your economy. This isn't going to last for long. And again, FDR sells all of these things as a stopgap to get back to where we need to be. And that as soon as we get back to where we need to be, all of these things will go away. Section 7A, workers formally guarantee the right to organize and bargain collectively. On this page right here, that's the most important thing, because right up to this point, unions had had a difficult time working or interacting with the federal government. FDR's dealings with labor is you should organize. You have a right to organize. And this is also, again, the shift toward labor into the Democratic Party, which has been a long-lasting coalition with the Democratic Party and labor unions. National Recovery, this is the NRA. I'm sorry, I got them backwards. Created under the leadership of Hugh Johnson to enforce the new laws. And so what would happen is merchants or businesses that were following this NRA code all those things that we just listed, paying a minimum wage, working, trying to get people back to work by sharing hours. That would be displayed. In the short run, businesses did improve, but it didn't really help small businesses. If you look, NRA is going to be shot down. Congress said delegated legislative authority to code makers, criticized again by a government overreaching. At the top of page 9, the Wagner Act, the National Labor, and we really do have pieces left of the Wagner Act. If you look, perhaps the most important piece of labor history, labor legislation in the history of the United States. This is, again, a really key part of this New Deal that prior to FDR and really the progressives had started working on the side of workers. Almost all legislation, especially if we go all the way back to our Federalist court system, protected businesses. And this is a big shift in the federal government beginning to protect workers. And the Wagner Act is a really important one. Asserted the right of labor to engage in self-organization, and that means unions, to bargain collectively through representatives, encourage the creation of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and then this will begin the beginnings of the AFL and the CIO. These are, again, important labor unions. Fair Labor Standards Act really is going to be the last. Minimum wage and 40-hour work week becomes a standard. So that, again, a long-lasting legacy. And the most important one to Mrs. Norris, prohibited child labor under 16. You can't work under 16 unless you are in a family business or farming. That is essential. And I hope what you're maybe seeing and what you should be making connections with is a lot of these New Deal policies are things left over that the progressives weren't able to do. And it just moves and continues forward. So 5, labor becomes a staunch ally of FDR and, more importantly, big box, Democratic Party. This is the marriage between labor and the Democratic Party under FDR, and these New Deal policies that protect, and he did try to protect both business and labor. It appears always that he's protecting labor more, but it's because no one had protected labor up to this point. So, last, Tennessee Valley Authority on that page, TVA. I think we mentioned that in our last set of notes, how important this is going to be. TVA was a public corporation under a 3-member board, and it is intended to reform the power monopoly of utility companies by hydroelectric. So they're going to use the Tennessee River to generate electricity, which, again, is a fairly novel idea in 1933 and really kind of still novel in the 21st century of this new way to generate electricity. It will employ thousands of people. They're going to have 20 dams built along that river, and that's what controls the river and the I don't know what you call how fast a stream moves. I was going to say velocity, but I don't think that applies to water. The velocity that the water moves to generate that energy. It will stop flooding, erosion, improve navigation, and the Muscle Shoals property on the Tennessee River Valley becomes the center part. Sought to establish fair trades by discovering how much the production of electricity actually costs. So how much? So now when your parents get their energy bill, their electric bill, on that bill is price per kilowatt. And in the state of Indiana, for any of those utilities to raise that kilowatt per hour, they have to apply to a special utilities board. They can't just, Duke Energy can't just say, hey, let's jack up the price of your electricity. They have to go through a process. And Indiana's utility board is fairly strict on raising the rates of people's electricity. Recently, with the building of, I can't remember the name of it, their new power plant down in St. Petersburg, just Petersburg. We're not in Russia. I can't remember the name of it. As always, what happens when you build things, you run into additional costs. They tried to go to the utilities board to raise rates to kind of offset their costs, and Indiana State Utility Board said, nope, you're not going to get to do that. You don't get to raise people's rates. So this is an important part of, again, protecting consumers ensuring that everyone has access to something like electricity. Huge success. It is a huge success. It is, though, criticized as socialistic due to government control of public utilities. Government controls public utilities now. And again, one of the things that when we turn this page and we get to the end of New Deal is all the threats that Republicans feel comes from this success that it might look socialist in nature. And again, the United States has a lot of socialist policies, one in particular called Social Security, that everybody puts into it and everybody takes out of it. I don't think people in America want utilities to be a for-profit and that everybody can charge whatever they want, because it gets a little bit crazy when that happens. The top of page 10, housing reform, the FHA, still in operation today. And that's the key part I hope that we take away from the New Deal. How many of these things that FDR did cutting edge in the 1930s still exist today? A whole bunch. Like almost half of these things still are in existence. And not a whole lot changed other than keeping up with the times and from what they originally intended to do. Stimulated building industry and lent money to states or communities for low cost construction. And again, criticized by real estate promoters as a waste of money, right? Don't be putting low cost housing. That's a waste of money when that's what, especially 1930, people needed. Again, the biggest thing that FDR does, the longest lasting, and look at this, one of the most far-reaching laws ever to pass Congress, ever, is Social Security. We've talked about this, and I've been mentioning it almost the whole course, that there's no social safety nets or economic safety nets for the people of the United States. If they lose their job, if they get hurt on their job, there's no old age pensions. We had nothing to cover any of that. And Social Security becomes that safety net, inspired by examples of high industrial European nations, because European nations had been doing it for years, like the late 1800s, they had already started doing these things. By 1939, over 45 million Americans were eligible. First benefits were paid out in 1942. So what Social Security is, and if you've not ever looked at your paycheck, it's on there as, I think it's FICA. I'm not sure what the initials are, but everybody pays into Social Security. And when you reach the age of retirement, depending on how much money you put in, you get to draw money out. Social Security also pays if you get injured on a job and you are no longer able to return to work. So you get Social Security benefits for that as well. Sadly, but fortunately, for people who lose either a spouse or children lose a parent, Social Security pays out benefits to them as well. All of it is based on how much money you have put in. So that's Social Security. Provided for federal, state unemployment, pension, payroll. It again is the longest lasting legacy of FDR and his New Deal program. The bottom of page 10, we're going to meet this final deal with Indians with the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. The Bureau of Indian Affairs persuaded Congress to repeal the Dawes Act, and the new law restored their tribal ownership of land. So they get their lands back. Reorganized tribal constitutions, governments provided loans, ended laws forbidding the use of Indian ceremonies, dress, and languages. We had laws on the books that said Indians couldn't wear their tribal clothing, they couldn't speak their language, they couldn't adhere to their customs since the 1880s. Finally, in 1934, we said, okay, that was probably bad. You get your stuff back. Secured creation of Indian Emergency Conservation Program, and Indians, again, will secure entry into these. So that is important in just the United States dealing with and making corrections on policies that they had previously supported. So the top of page 11, the effects of the New Deal, they are huge. The economy improved. It's not going to recover. That's why this thing is so disastrous. It's not going to recover until the 1940s. It's horrific. GDP is going to rise. Manufacturing salaries and wages are going to increase. Farm income is going to more than double. Unemployment is going to drop from about 25% to about 20%. Still, if we had 20% unemployment right now, it would be disastrous. But everything is moving in the right direction. Slow, because this recovery is going to be horrible and long, but moving in the right direction. So, it's all these things are happening, but critics have their issues with the New Deal. The first will be the American Liberty League. And again, it's important to know who's part of this. Wealthy Republicans, conservative Democrats. So this is not a political party. It's bipartisan, meaning there are these wealthy Republicans and very conservative Democrats are forming in 1934 to fight socialist New Deal schemes. They see these things as an attack on the idea of socialist moving into government, and it terrifies them. Defend business interests. They are unsuccessful in overthrowing FDR in the 1936 elections, so they don't win. Probably the most vocal person and the person that you might be asked about on a test is Father Charles Coughlin. He's a priest, so hence the word father. He has a radio show. He was initially a big supporter, got FDR elected. He has a gigantic, huge radio audience, 40 million. And again, that's how large this Catholic Church is in the United States. Called Roosevelt a liar for not nationalizing the banks, and later becomes very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, and a strong fascist rhetoric. And his show will eventually be canceled. The other, and we need a box around the bottom, is Senator Long, known as Kingfish. He's from this great state of Louisiana, and he has an even broader interpretation of the New Deal. And he gives us really large, giant leaps into the idea of socialist policies with Share Our Wealth. This was a program to make every man a king, which is where he gets his name, Kingfish, from, by supplying every family with $5,000 at the expense of the prosperous. So, hey, all you rich people, you got to give everybody $5,000. And as you can imagine, that does not go over very well. High inheritance taxes on large estates would be levied. So how would we pay to give everybody $5,000? If you inherit a lot of money, you have to pay. Just side note, now if you inherit a lot of money, you hardly pay anything at all. There's almost zero inheritance tax. He was a very popular governor in Louisiana. He raised taxes to fund schools, hospitals. He built roads, controlled Louisiana politics from his Senate seat in Washington, and he's going to be assassinated in 1935, largely for a lot of these politics. And this Share the Wealth, again, is going to continue, but I hope you understand it is not going to go very far. Top of page 12, Dr. Francis Townsend. First, it's a guy. I always feel like I need to say that because whenever we have things to write about it, everybody always refers to she. He's a he. Organized 5 million supporters for his old age revolving pension plan. Advocated each senior citizen gets $200 a month. That was twice the average worker's salary, provided that you spend that money in a month. You get it? You got to spend it. And what does that mean? It's that stimulus of the economy, that you're spending money. And when you spend money, it provides people employment, right? When you buy a new refrigerator, when you buy a newspaper, when you buy groceries, all of those things stimulate the economy. So what Townsend is saying, people need to be spending money, not saving money, because psychologically what happens to you in economic difficulties is people save their money because they're afraid they're going to lose their job, or they're afraid it's going to get even worse, when actually that's the worst thing to do in a bad economy, because you need to spend money so people get jobs. Psychologically, it's hard to get people out of that, right? I don't want to spend money. I'm afraid I might lose my job. So stimulating that becomes difficult. And it's often why government gives away money, because they need people to spend money. And that doesn't go far as well. On page 12, a second New Deal, which is more reform oriented. Roosevelt responds to the Democratic voters, and as he wins the election of 1936, he introduces new programs, WPA, again, a giant list of things. 1936 elections, new Democratic Party coalition. This is significant. This new Democratic Party, Black, African Americans, unions, intellectuals, city machines, and now the South. And the South will be part of this because of their recovery. Expanded farm programs, labor legislation, rural electrification, public housing, and enforcement of antitrust laws. The South can directly see in those 4 years what happened as a result of President Roosevelt. It's visible to them when they flip a light switch. It's visible to them when they see farms plowing fields. So for them to jump from that back into that Democratic Party is important. Republicans, they don't have anything to offer. It's really hard to again combat success with a different political candidate, and that's going to be the problem for Republicans for the next 4 elections. Is the policies of Roosevelt are so successful, and secondarily, the relationship that Roosevelt has with the American people is second to none. Second to none. His ability to convey confidence, his fireside chats, all of those things lend itself to success for Roosevelt. At the bottom of page 12, look at that landslide, 523 to 2. Like that's 523 2 electoral votes he got. Now, the biggest issue, let me see where I'm at. Oh, yay. The biggest issue for analyzing FDR's 4 years is his Supreme Court. This is, if anyone wants bad checks to Roosevelt, it's this. And it is his court packing scheme. So at the top of page 13, everybody is going to challenge all of these New Deal programs. Almost every single one of those things that we just talked about in these last few pages will be challenged in court. Like, that's unconstitutional, that's unconstitutional, that's unconstitutional. And when they get to the Supreme Court does say, a lot of them, unconstitutional. You don't have the authority to do that. So Schnechter versus U.S., this is called the sick chicken case. Court ruled that the NRA was unconstitutional. Can't do it. Congress does not have delegate legislative authority to the executive branch or to code makers in industry. Congressional control of interstate commerce did not apply to local Brooklyn poultry business because it didn't cross state lines. So that failed. Butler versus U.S. Court ruled regulatory taxation provisions in the AA is unconstitutional. Federal government cannot tax business that bought agricultural products. So he keeps losing. And so what he decides to do is, I'm going to change the court. I'm going to change it. I can't. We've got to keep moving forward. And every time the Supreme Court knocks down one of these things because they say it's unconstitutional, it hurts the country. So the Judiciary Reorganization Bill in 1937 is an attempt by FDR to remove old conservative judges by imposing a retirement age of 70 and adding more justices. If justices refused to step down, president could appoint an additional justice. So if you didn't step down when you were 70, I'm going to put somebody else on the court. This was called court packing. Critics accused FDR of being a dictator and trying to pack the court. FDR condemned for tampering with the delicate checks and balances. The bill is not passed, but you need to know this. Of all the positive things that FDR does over his 4 years of 4 terms as president, This is the thing that stands out, right? This is the thing that gives him the black check mark on his legacy. Increasingly, the court began siding with FDR later. Minimum wage for women, the Wagner Act. Ironically, FDR gets 9 appointments. Like, he gets 9 because he's president for, he's not president for 16 years because he doesn't. He's president for 14 years. 14 years. Some people, that's the only president they had ever known in their life. All right, last, page 14 and 15, the recession. The recession, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that because, again, it's economic stuff. FDR authorized a reduction in the pump priming practices because we had kind of, the economy had kind of gone flat. And Democrats are going to start to lose seats. And that will happen, right, over time as one party controls it. The same thing happened in the 1920s, right, when Republicans controlled. Democrats are going to slowly start to lose seats, and Republicans will gain more power in Congress. So we need to be able to when we talk about the New Deal, positives, but we also need, obviously, some criticism. New Deal failed to cure the Great Depression. Unemployment is never going to be lower than 16%. What ends the Great Depression is World War II. And sadly, that's the answer. Bureaucracy mushroomed. So like the federal government quadrupled overnight. Quadrupled. This is yet another time Thomas Jefferson's going to be rolling over in his grave. The government that governs least governs best is gone. That is like, whoo, it's gone forever. State power fades further. This superseding of the federal government under FDR and the New Deal again explodes. U.S. becoming a handout state, and again, the issue isn't the handout, it's the issue with the thought process. European nations have been doing it for years, and the thought process of that for the United States as a capitalist nation that we're just giving people money does something to our psyche. Businesses accuse the New Deal of fomenting class conflict. Planned economy, creeping in socialism, that's a big one. And for many cases, there are a lot of socialist tendencies in some of these policies. New Deal didn't cure the Great Depression, the Second World War did. The top of page 15, the support of the New Deal, and most important, that underlined A, may have saved American capitalism, because it is essential that capitalism was shored up to prevent all the revolutions of socialism and real communism happening in Europe. FDR's positive leadership, I would put a big box around that one. Leadership cannot be doubted as getting us through the Great Depression, and FDR was the man to do that. Again, every single criticism that he has can be stomped down by the fact that this man led us through the most horrific time in the history of our country, and I hope forever in the history of our country, because it was horrible. New Deal relieved the worst crisis of 1933. New Deal reforms still important today. E, Social Security, labor laws, TVA, FDIC, FHA, minimum wage, maximum hours, all of those things come from FDR's legislation, his presidency, and his commitment to keep the United States going forward. A fair distribution of national income, citizens are able to retain their self-respect. Middle of the road approach, right? He wasn't either side. He was a middle of the road. Made him the greatest American conservative since Hamilton. So, an age of reform, be able to compare, contrast populism, progressivism, New Deal. Okay? All right. So, check in after you watch this with your assignment. And I hope you guys have a great day. I don't know what the weather's supposed to be like outside. I think there's lots of sports this afternoon. All of you in your sports event, awesome. And I saw lots of you won last night, all of your various activities. Wyatt won medalist. That's awesome, Wyatt. And I think baseball won, softball won, tennis won. It was a great night for aero sports. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.